by nearly every regulated jurisdiction in North America, the exception being the state of California. They are the only state that has a state-specific exam testing specifically on California building codes. Otherwise, if you're looking to become licensed, registered, or certified in interior design in the US or Canada, you would need to have passed our exam in order to do so. There's a question in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and address it now, and we'll also talk about it towards the end of the presentation. Can you explain what unregulated state means? Yes. So again, I'll use Ohio, for example. For those of you who don't know, I'm not an interior designer. I do not have a design background or education in interior design, no work experience. There is nothing preventing me today from calling myself an interior designer, from practicing interior design in the state of Ohio. While morally or ethically might not be the greatest choice, I'm technically not breaking any laws. There's nothing preventing me from doing that. In the states that do have regulation in place, most of that regulation is voluntary. And it's if you're looking to use a certain title, like registered interior designer, RID, or certified interior designer, CID. And in some case, those titles get you some additional privileges, like the ability to stamp and seal. Possibly you heard the news that North Carolina just signed a bill in the last week or so that now instituted a Title Act of registered interior designers, and individuals who decide to pursue that registration will have the ability to stamp and seal their own drawings. So there are other benefits that may come along with that, but we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. I've also included on this slide another reason why certification is so important, the financial aspect. So some independent quotes from the two professional organizations, ASID and IIDA, about a potential increase in your salary that you may see as a result of becoming NCIDQ certified. Certainly something we have heard time and time again of individuals getting a bump in their salary or a bonus as a result of passing the exam. So a potential benefit you might see on the back end as well. In terms of what we're going to cover today, again, all the basic information. For those of you who are already in the testing process, some of this might be repetitive, but I'll try to add in some tips as we go along. But whenever you are looking to learn more about the exam or get started on the process, just make sure you always go back to our website at CIDQ.org. It is the most accurate and correct source of information when it comes to the exam. So make sure you go back to that site with any questions going forward. I am going to highlight some recent changes that just went into effect this spring. Some of this I know has caused some anxiety, but shouldn't be that much of a change. The first item there are the new exam blueprints. So every 5 years, we do a study of the profession called a practice analysis to determine what the necessary skills and knowledge areas that an individual needs to be competent in to practice interior design. The results of that practice analysis help us to create the exam blueprints, which detail the content areas or sections we are testing on the live exams. So those went into effect April of this year and will be used for about the next 5 years until we repeat that process again. The other big change that went into effect this spring is specifically with regards to the Practicum exam and the new building codes that are now being used for that exam section. So candidates need to be familiar with the IBC, the International Building Codes, as well as a few other real-world codes. For the exam itself, you don't need to memorize them, but you definitely do need to be familiar with them and incorporate them into your studying. And on the exam, you will be asked to demonstrate your ability to understand and apply the codes to the particular problem. You heard me mention the Practicum exam a minute ago. It is one of 3 sections that make up the NCIDQ exam. The other two being the IDFX and the IDPX. And you do need to take and pass all three in order to become NCIDQ certified. This first exam section, the IDFX, tests specifically on book knowledge or what you are actively learning in school. And individuals are eligible to take that first section during your senior year of a bachelor's degree or final year of a master's degree program, or anytime after you graduate. It does not require any work experience for that first section. If there are any students or recent graduates on the call, we definitely encourage you to take that exam sooner than later, because again, it is testing you on that foundational knowledge that you're learning in school. And so it's a little bit easier for you to recall when it's fresh on your mind. Also, as a student, you're sort of already in the studying mindset. And again, it can help to set yourself apart as you are seeking different job opportunities, letting that employer know that you've taken that first step and applied for the first exam section. The other two exam sections, the IDPX and the Practicum, do require a minimum of 2 years of work experience, and those test specifically on what you're learning through practice or what you're learning in the working world. The first two sections there are pretty straightforward, being all multiple choice. So there is a question, 4 answer choices, 1 being correct, the other 3 being incorrect. The Practicum, on the other hand, does have 3 different question types, as you can see on the screen. And we do have a demo video on our website that walks through those 3 question types. A few tips for you that a little bit hard to find on the website, but the information's there if you really look. The first is that you are able to flag questions and mark them for review. So if there's one that you're really not sure about, or you feel like you're spending too much time on it, you can flag it. And if you have time at the end, you can go back and review those questions that you had marked. The same is true for the Practicum, with a small caveat that I'll talk about here in a minute. I do see there's a few questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and address some of these right now. I am still talking about the exam basics slide, so yes, this is the one that you should be seeing here. Will the IBC codes be available during the Practicum exam, like how the previous Q codes were available in a separate tab or pop-out? Yes, they will. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Will we cover what books are best to study from? You'll have to wait and see, Veronica. We'll get to that in a few minutes. The other one I'll address right now is, will the IBC codes be available for use during the FX and PX exams? For the FX and PX exams, any code-related questions, the information is provided in the question itself. So there's not any sort of outside document that you're needing to reference for those 2 exam sections. Another tip for the exams is to make sure that you are keeping an eye on the clock. Time management is really critical. So again, especially since you have that ability to mark questions for review, if you're spending 10 minutes on a question, it is time to move on, because you do not have 10 minutes to spend on each question. And along with that, you do not lose points for any incorrect answers. So especially on the multiple choice exams, maybe you're stuck between A and B, you're really not sure which one it is. If you choose A, at least you have a 25% chance of getting it correct. But if you happen to be wrong, you're not going to lose any points for taking that guess. Final tip I'll share with you on this slide. For the Practicum exam, the question is either entirely correct or entirely incorrect. There is no partial credit given. So if you were asked to move 4 tokens into the floor plan to answer the question, and you only move 3, even if those 3 are in the correct location, you did not include the 4th one. Therefore, you got the question wrong. So make sure you're taking your time to read the questions thoroughly and find out exactly what they're asking. I've also included some statistics here from this spring administration. The pass rates are a little bit lower than normal just due to the new exam blueprints, but the important thing to know is that In addition to your education and work experience, you definitely do need to put in the time and effort to prepare for the exams in order to be successful in passing them. And keep going through the slides, but keep dropping your questions in the chat and we'll get back to those. So looking at the practicum for a minute, I mentioned this demo video that's on our website, CIDQ.org/practicum. You definitely want to take a look at it prior to taking that third section, just so you can see how the information is displayed on the screen, in addition to seeing an example of each of those question types. We were talking about the exam codes a minute ago. They will be available on the exam screen itself through a tab up here at the top that you can click on to reference, as well as some other resources that you might need to reference to help you answer the particular question. You do not have and are not able to have a printed copy or a physical copy that you take in with you. Everything that you are accessing is on the computer screen itself. It is a single monitor, by the way. I think it's 23 inches in size. So I know that can sometimes be a little bit of an adjustment for those of us used to working with 2 or 3 monitors. As it states, there's no drawing involved for the practicum exam, and you don't need to have any specific software knowledge. No CAD, Revit, Adobe, Rhino, SketchUp, anything. Essentially, if you're able to use a mouse and navigate on a computer screen, you can be successful in navigating the exam platform. As it states, there's 120 total questions on the practicum exam, evenly split across 3 case studies, a small commercial, large commercial, and residential. And you do take all 3 case studies as part of the practicum exam. I mentioned about that ability to flag questions for review, and the same is true for the practicum with a caveat. You can only mark questions for review and go back and review them when you are within a given case study. For example, if I'm doing the large commercial case study and I mark questions for review, I need to answer them while I'm still in the large commercial case study. Because once I finish that case study and move on to small commercial, as an example, that case study is locked down and I cannot go back to it at all during the rest of my exam appointment. So make sure that when you're finished with each case study, you are taking a few minutes reviewing any questions you have flagged, because again, once you finish that case study, it will be locked down and you are prevented from going back and accessing it. I also mentioned about the time management piece. Very true for the practicum as well. Make sure you're keeping an eye on the clock. And I recommend going in with a game plan. So maybe you knew that large commercial was a weaker area for you. So you could go in planning to spend 2 hours on large commercial, 1 hour on small commercial, and 1 hour on residential. Maybe when you got in the appointment, not quite how things would go, but you don't want to be 3.5 hours in and still working on the first case study. So again, keep an eye on the clock and use that ability to flag questions for review to help you keep your exam appointment moving. I'll answer this one here now. Are we allowed to bring scratch paper and pencil, or will those be provided at the test center? You literally cannot take anything into the actual testing room with you, just yourself. You cannot take a bottle of water with you. You cannot take your car keys, purse, phone, book that you read on the subway. All of that is left in a locker out sort of in the lobby area of the testing environment. If they do not provide scratch paper and pencil, which they would collect at the end, I know that some facilities do a whiteboard and dry erase markers, and I'm not 100% sure on this, Emily, so you can follow up with me after if you want. But I know that some are also moving completely away from sort of physical materials and using a online whiteboard or an online scratch paper format. So it's on the computer itself, not a physical item that you would have, but you would not bring anything with you into the test center. They would provide those materials. So when it comes to qualifying for the exam, we do require a combination of education and work experience. So depending on the type of education you have, looking at these upper boxes, you would just follow the arrow down to determine the number of work experience hours that are needed. For all individuals, you can count up to 1,760 hours prior to graduation. So that could be through internships, co-ops, full-time work, part-time work, it doesn't matter, as long as it is in interior design. When it comes to documenting work experience, we do require that you use our form, which is in a screenshot here on this slide. It is pretty basic, 2 pages. The first page, you're essentially documenting who you worked for, when you started working there, the number of hours you've worked, what type of responsibilities you had. And the second page is signed off on by either your direct supervisor or sponsor, affirming that those hours did indeed occur during the date specified and for the employer specified. You would fill out a separate work form for each employer that you worked at. For example, if you've worked at 3 different employers, you would fill out 3 separate forms, one for each employer that you are claiming hours for. This is all that we accept for documenting work experience. We don't accept resumes, portfolios, offer letters, recommendation letters, anything like that. Just this 2-page form is what we accept and what we require. When it comes to applying for the exam, you essentially have 2 different options separated by this gray bar. And for those of you who haven't yet started the application process, we just posted this application video about a week ago on our apply page that walks through the full application process and also provides screenshots from your online account so you can see exactly what it would look like when you're actually going through the online application process. But for those of you who haven't gotten started yet, if you have your education complete, or perhaps you're in your final year of a bachelor's or master's degree program, and you want to go ahead and get started on the exams before you have all your work hours complete, you can go ahead and apply for that first section, the IDFX. And for that, you just need your school transcript and pay the application fee. So super quick process. Then once you have the work hours complete and you are ready to apply for the other 2 exam sections, you would submit the second portion of the application for the IDPX and the Practicum, which would include your school transcript, your work verification form, and pay the application fee. Or you can wait until you have your education and work experience complete and go ahead and apply for all 3 exams at one time using the same application materials. A common misconception we hear is that if you apply for all 3 exams at one time, you're required to take all 3 exams at one time, and that is not true. Applying for all 3 exams and getting approved for all 3 just means you are eligible to take all 3. It is up to you how you decide to take those exams within your application time period. And I see that's one of the questions in the chat here. So I'll get into that next. So when we look at how much everything costs here, generally speaking, this application fee is a one-time fee. So to apply for the IDFX only, this $95 fee is valid for 4 exam administrations or about 2 years. So you would have 4 opportunities to take and pass that first section. Then, once you have your work experience complete and you are ready to apply for the other 2 sections, this $145 fee would be valid for 10 exam administrations, which is about 5 years. One of the questions in the chat is, if you pass the IDFX, does it have an expiration date? Not when you break it apart in this 2 application option, it does not. Because it is its own application, if you pass the IDFX exam, that passing score stays valid for however long it takes you to come back and pass the other 2 sections. So whether that's 6 months later, 2 years later, 10 years later, that IDFX passing score is still valid because it's connected to a separate application. But once you apply for the IDPX and Practicum, again, you would be given those 10 exam windows to take and pass those 2 sections. And once done, all 3 of those would combine to grant you an NCIDQ certificate. Alternatively, probably a more common option for the individuals on this call, would be applying for all 3 exams at one time, which means you have both your education and work experience complete. This $225 fee is valid for 10 exam administrations, about 5 years. So if you applied today, for example, and got approved today, you would have 10 exam administrations starting this fall to take and pass all 3 sections. It's up to you how you want to take the exams within that 10 window period. Okay, if you take the IDPX and Prac and fail, will you need to apply again, or does the 5-year period still apply? So you have the 5-year period. So for example, again, you applied today, you were approved today, you took and passed the IDPX and the Practicum this fall, but you did not pass either of them. Well, you still have 9 more opportunities to take and pass those 2 sections. The important thing to know in that instance is that once you've applied and been approved and you're ready to actually take your exams, that's when you pay this exam fee. That's the fee that you pay to book your exam appointment. And you want to wait to pay that fee until you're feeling confident, you're prepared, you're ready to test, because if you are not successful in passing the exams, or you need to cancel, or you don't show up, you would need to repay this fee again in the future. So you can see that it can add up very quickly. All in to apply and take each section, it's over $1,300. So it's definitely an investment in your future. I always recommend on this screen, please talk with your employer to see if they are able to be financially supportive of you pursuing NCIDQ certification. We've heard of a number of companies, large and small, that will often reimburse the exam fees. So you might need to pay them upfront out of pocket, but once you pass the exams, the company will reimburse you on the back end. I've also heard of companies providing time off to study for the exams, time off to take the exams, and providing a budget to purchase study materials. They're not always necessarily coming to you with these kinds of opportunities, especially if they have like a professional development line in their budget. Again, ask your employer, see if you're able to use those funds to help cover some of these exam costs. I'll also share with you, for those of you on the call, there are members of IIDA at the national level. They do have a scholarship available to help cover those exam costs. We do have that link on our website. And again, that's offered through the IIDA national office. When we look at the dates and deadlines for just a minute, we do accept applications all year round. It just depends on when you apply as to when you'd first be eligible to test. So the fall deadline's coming up in just about 2 weeks. And for those of you who have been approved, and I know some of you are scheduled to take the exams, they are going to be offered this October, as well as April each year at Prometric test centers around the world. It is the exact same exam no matter where you take it. So if you took one section in Pennsylvania, and then you moved to Illinois and took the second section there, and then you moved to Japan and took the third section there, it is the exact same exam no matter where you take it. All right, one of the questions we got here earlier, will we cover what books are best to study from? So unfortunately, CIDQ does not recommend or endorse any particular study books, flashcards, quizzes, online workshops, everything that's out there. Those are all produced by independent third parties. They're not associated with us. And so it's really up to you to do your own due diligence to find out what might work for you. We often recommend checking with friends, coworkers, individuals who have recently taken the exam to see what they found useful. And again, sort of do your own due diligence. On our website, we do provide a listing of ASID and IIDA study groups that we're made aware of. Jenna or Julianne mentioned at the beginning of the call about a study series that they have going on this fall. So that's certainly something you could look into, or possibly next spring if you're looking to study for the exams in the future. We also provide on our website a list of books that are used to write the exam questions. Every single question is tied back to a reference book, and the list is quite long. So please don't go out and purchase all of them, but you might see some of your textbooks on there or some books that are in your office that you might want to reference as well. And I see that Julianne did post a link in the chat box with some recommended books that they have that the chapter has recommended. So definitely encourage you to check out that resource. The most important thing I want you to remember from today's call, if you forget everything else I said, is this slide and the next one. No matter what you are using to prepare for the exams, please make sure you come back to our website to download these exam blueprints. These are all completely free resources available for anyone at any time. You don't need to have an account or provide your email or anything like that. But as I mentioned earlier, these just went into effect April of this year, and they detail the content areas we are testing on the live exams. And they also provide some details as to what you are expected to know or demonstrate for each of those content areas. So again, make sure you're including those as a reference point along with other study materials that you might be using. We also have some free practice questions for the IDFX and IDPX exams. And those are just provided to give candidates a better understanding of the format and types of questions that you can expect on those two multiple choice sections. The other important piece is when it comes to the practicum exam. So again, earlier in the call, I mentioned those new exam codes that went into effect this April, which is this yellow button. These are screenshots from our website. So this is exactly what it looks like if you go on our website. For this spring exam, we provided a spring specific document that included the relevant chapters and sections that individuals needed to be familiar with for the spring exam. Again, you cannot bring a copy of this into the test center with you, but you are able to access it during the exam. And during the exam itself, for each case study, it is only showing you the relevant chapters and sections for that particular case study. So there might still be a lot of information to go through, but again, you are demonstrating your ability to understand and apply the codes. For those of you who might be taking the practicum this fall, you will want to reference this spring document for the time being, but make sure you keep an eye on your email and check back on our website in late August, as it mentions, as we will be posting a fall specific codes document that will vary minimally from the spring file. We also have some additional details about the 3 case studies that the practicum covers as well, so you'll definitely want to take a look at that. Final couple slides here. First off is our preliminary score report. So for those of you taking the IDFX and IDPX exam, you will receive a preliminary score approximately an hour after you complete your exam appointment. That will be sent via email. And this is what it looks like right here. And this is very similar to what your final and official score report would look like. We cannot provide any additional details beyond this. And if you were not successful in passing, you would really need to use the score report to see which areas that you didn't perform as well in. So for this particular candidate, if they had failed, they would want to focus on design communication going forward because that is the area they performed weakest in. All right, touching on regulation a little bit more. We touched on it a little bit at the beginning. You can see this wonderful map. I mentioned North Carolina just had a bill signed about a week or 2 ago. It's really important that no matter where you all end up practicing, that's the important part, practicing, not necessarily where you're living, that you're understanding what the current laws and regulations are in place. Currently, there is no regulation in the state of Pennsylvania or in Delaware. New Jersey does have regulation, but is voluntary. So if you're looking to use the title certified interior designer, you need to be certified with the state of New Jersey. And in order to do that, you need to have passed our exam. So you can see how everything ties in together. We strongly encourage you, even when voluntary, that you are taking that next step to really help elevate and advocate for your profession. To tie everything back to the beginning as to why certification matters, at the base, you don't know where your career is going to take you. So having that NCIDQ certification under your belt is just going to open up opportunities that might not otherwise be available for you, particularly if you're working with a larger firm, Gensler, HOK, Perkins. Maybe you're looking to get involved in leadership or to start your own business, or perhaps you have certain clients that are demanding it, like government or healthcare clients. Again, having that certification under your belt really demonstrates that you have that education and experience and that you're dedicated to showing that knowledge, because again, NCIDQ certification is not required. So the fact that you're taking that step to better yourself professionally will really help you as you continue on in your career. Final slide here, again, with my contact details. I know there's a few questions in the chat box I did not address, so we'll save those for the very end. And Emily also posted a comment in there about a reference book that she is using to study for the exam, so you guys can take a look at that as well. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Kate in to join us for the next section. And then again, we'll save some questions at the end. Kate, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yeah, I can hear you. So Kate, to get started here, do you mind just giving everyone a brief introduction of yourself, maybe what type of work you do, who you work for, that sort of thing?
Sure. So I'm an interior designer at Ballinger. I graduated from Drexel University in 2007. When I started working for a small firm doing workplace design for a client that was fairly standardized. But since it was a small firm, I got to be involved in all phases of the project, including putting together invitations to bid, reviewing bid documents, reaching out to the local code officials to verify building codes. At Ballinger, I was actually allowed to be involved in all phases of the project still, even though they're a larger firm. So basically everything from programming to CA. And I also do workplace, and at Ballinger, I'm also on some higher ed projects.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Kate. Like I mentioned, everyone, I have a few questions prepared for Kate, but again, welcome any that you have. So Kate, do you mind talking a little bit about what your strategy was in taking the exam? I mentioned that you took all three this past spring. Was that sort of always your thought process going in, or what was your planning in doing all three?
I think it would be nice of you to say that I had a strategy going into the exam. So basically it took me, I first started gathering materials to take the exam at my first job, I think in 2012. Okay. And it took me until this year to really carve out the time that I needed in my life to study for it. So basically what I did is I went through the blueprints to kind of try to understand what each section would cover. And I tried to figure out where I might struggle, where I might excel. So I ended up signing up for the IDPX first, then the IDFX, and then the Practicum. I signed up to take all three parts in the same week. I don't know that I would recommend people do that. It put a lot of pressure on me to be prepared and to really study the full content of what the exam would test me on. Before that, I think if I were to do it again, I would probably push the Practicum out a little, because in terms of content, it's similar, but in terms of practice taking the test, it really required me to spend more time familiarizing myself with the format of the test, practicing, reviewing the program that they give you, as well as familiarizing myself with the codes and where to access certain information that I needed. So if I could do it again, I think I would have pushed out that Practicum a couple of weeks and given myself a little bit more time.
Yeah, the good thing about scheduling your exams, like Kate said, is that you pick whatever dates and times that you want to take them in. So she happened to take them all in the same week, but certainly if you have the ability to sort of space them out, if you're taking more than one in an administration, you maybe want the beginning of the month, one in the middle, one at the end. And Kate is just one viewpoint. So she did decide to do all three exams at one time. And there are lots of people that do choose that option. Because at the base, they're all covering the profession of interior design, but it really is a personal choice. And so if you want to take one at a time, two at a time, one per year. It's really up to you as to how you want to split those up. Can you talk a little bit, Kate, about what your studying strategy was, if there were certain materials that you used, if you joined any sort of study groups or studied with friends, or if it was really just more sort of your own method?
Yeah, so I started with the NCIDQ reference manual to try to get a feel of what content I would be tested on. And basically it's everything. And I took a little bit of an old school approach of kind of reading through the manual and outlining it. It's been a while since I had to study for anything. So I think it took me a little bit of time to come up with a strategy. And I would like to say, if there are people like me out there who are a little bit older and waited a little bit longer and are paralyzed with that fear about learning to study again, like, you can absolutely do it. It's a little bit like riding a bike. You'll figure it out. So for the first 2 months, I ended up studying for 3 months, January, February, March. I took the test the first full week of April. For the first 2 months, I really relied on that reference manual and then some outside free study materials that I had been given by friends and coworkers to really get an idea of content, to get an idea of areas that might be weaker for me, so I could really focus in on those areas. And then in March, I signed up for Q Practice, which was tremendously helpful in terms of practicing to take a test. So I think one of the most challenging things for me about the NCIDQ was learning time management, learning how to operate within how the test is formatted, particularly for the practicum. So the practicum isn't software based. It is all about you just learning to use the system. And if you know how to use a mouse, you know how to use the system, but it does take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with how the question's laid out, what parts and pieces you need to contribute to a potential question, how to navigate between the different windows, because you have to pull up the programming window if you want to reference the program. You have to pull up the codes if you want to reference the codes. So learning to kind of toggle between those three views, I think, was really valuable. Q Practice was tremendously helpful for that. They also provided a ton of additional materials that I could use in areas where I was a little bit weaker to help me kind of strengthen my knowledge in those areas. And then, of course, I reached out to coworkers. I reached out to friends I had known who took the test, and they all had kind of advice and materials to give me, and it was just really nice to feel like I wasn't alone in this process.
Mm-hmm.
And that I had a community of people who kind of had my back and that I could go to with questions.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, especially since this is a chapter event, there's lots of other people that are going to be taking the exam. So make sure you're tapping into those resources, even if you're not part of a formal study group. Again, going through a similar process as someone else, bouncing ideas or questions off of them, sharing resources can certainly be helpful. And like Kate said, you really sort of need to do a self-assessment and see which areas are you weaker in. Like, it's okay, but then you want to make sure that you're dedicating more time to that in your studying so that you will be able to be successful on those areas on the exam. And obviously that's not going to be the same for everyone, but really take the time to look at those blueprints and sort of see if there's ones that, again, you're weaker in, maybe you don't have as much experience in, you haven't done it for 5 years, so it's a little bit foggy. So make sure that you're taking the time to sort of do that analysis. Go ahead, were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say, it's also really important to understand that you're not only memorizing information, you're teaching yourself how to access information. So one of the big things that I was kind of concerned about going into the test was, and April was the first time we were using the 2018 IBC codes. And I knew that they were a bit different from what we had been referencing before. Yes. So all of the practicum practice tests I took were using old codes. And I was concerned that what I was practicing being tested on wasn't going to be the same content that I was going to be tested on. So I found a good strategy for me was to go through the IBC codes that CIDQ gave us and kind of put my life safety hat on and figure out what were the big highlights when it came to life safety in these codes as it pertains to being an interior designer, and kind of make a little outline of all the things I needed to remember, but also where to find them. And I think that really helped me save a lot of time on the test and really kind of anticipate what might be different from the practice test I was taking versus the final test. So that would be one thing that I really suggest that you do. I would suggest that you familiarize yourself with the codes anyway, and that doesn't mean you need to like remember every word. It's really where they are and how to access them.
Yeah, that's so true. And really great insight that Kate just provided. Definitely, again, incorporate them into your studying. It's a very long document, like over 50 pages. So there's no way you're going to be able to memorize it. But again, being able to know which chapters are where, what sections are within that chapter at that high level sort of summary would be good to have. One of the questions in the chat was with regards to the Q Practice subscription that you have. What length subscription did you opt for that?
I did the monthly. So I could choose to like extend it into April if I had wanted to. And doing that really worked for me. I do have a coworker who also took the exam who had less experience than me. She like had, I think she's had 2 years of work experience, and she opted for a longer subscription, and that really helped her in terms of studying. So I think it depends on where you're starting from and how much help you're actually going to need in kind of understanding the content. So again, assessing what your strengths and weaknesses are and picking a plan that works for you is really important.
So still on the studying front, can you give attendees an idea of sort of what your schedule was like? Were you studying every single night? Was it 3 hours a week, or sort of how intense was it in those couple months leading up to the exam?
So my strategy Monday through Friday was I set aside 1.5 to 2 hours of revision during the week, with on Friday allowing myself to have a glass of wine after the first hour of studying, which I thought was really important to my success. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I set aside larger blocks, first for kind of reviewing different materials, kind of working outside of the reference manual, and then for taking practice tests. It was really helpful to me to take a ton of practice tests and then go back and review the questions that I got wrong and start to see patterns in areas of weaknesses that I was having, and go back and kind of spend my time reviewing those sections and really making the most of my time studying.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to other things I've heard. It definitely is a time commitment, and really you need to be diligent. Like I mentioned earlier, if for some reason you're not successful, it's not going to be $10 to retake it next week. Like, you're going to have to pay hundreds of dollars and wait another 6 months in order to take it. So if you put it in your mind that, I know some of you mentioned you're taking it this October, like it's time to buckle down, allocate some time in your schedule to really put in the effort to prepare for this exam, and try not to look at it as like, I'm just going to spend the next 3 months preparing for this exam, and then like all that knowledge is going to be thrown in the trash. Like, this really is expanding your knowledge of the profession as a whole. So try to look at it as sort of a learning opportunity in that regard as well. A couple of the questions in the chat, this one's off topic, but we'll go ahead and adjust it. Do you have a master's degree along with the NCIDQ certification? I'm guessing that's for you, Kate.
No, I graduated Drexel before they had the master's program, so I just have my bachelor's.
Awesome. And then one that was up here earlier from Pasquale was asking, can you give us a little more idea of what the practicum consists of? So Pasquale, I really can't provide much more insight. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not an interior designer. I've honestly never seen the exam because I'm not on the exam development side. I think Kate provided some really good tips in terms of what her experience was like. Is there any other sort of tips that you can remember that you might want to share specifically about the practicum exam section, or things people should sort of be aware of?
Yeah, so the practicum was actually the hardest section for me to take. So I'm just going to be very upfront with everyone that it is a challenge. And most of that challenge comes from the timing and time management. So with the IDPX and the IDFX, I had plenty of time to flag as many questions as I want. I went back and reviewed questions that I had flagged twice even. I had all the time in the world. With the practicum, you really need to set a time limit for what you're going to spend on a certain section. That also means that you want to be really economical about what questions that you flag, because you're not going to have time to go back and review all of the questions if you were to flag them like you would the IDPX and the IIDFX. So you really just want to flag questions that you really need to spend that extra time on. You want to prioritize those. you're going to want to say, I set time limits for each of those 3 different case studies. And I would say practicing skimming the programming information that provided was critical, because I was able to, in Philadelphia, they give you scrap paper, and I was able to take some cursory notes, like at the top of the case study, and just write down a few comments to myself that mostly helped me find information in the programming so I can be really efficient when I went back to it. Also, because of the because the IBC 2018 has less requirements for kind of fire separation between tenants and conditions like that, expects there to be local codes written into the programming. So they're going to want to test you on, obviously, how you construct a firewall. That requirement might not necessarily be in the occupancy information in the IBC. You're going to want to look through that programming document to make sure that they're not including local codes in there that you also have to accommodate. That was a little bit of a time suck for me because I wasn't expecting it. So I wanted to get that to the team.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate it. Like I said, I know a few of them mentioned at the beginning that they are for sure taking the practicum this fall, which again is really great. Why it's really great rather to tap into people that have taken the exam recently, because again, they can share this firsthand knowledge with you of what their experience was like. And again, re-emphasizing how critical time management is, and really test taking strategy comes into play. Like, it's not just knowing the information. Like she said, it's using that time wisely, skimming things, reading the questions thoroughly. There's lots of words in the question, but like, are all the words important, or just a few of the words that are important? And so really trying to decipher that information. And something else that Kate might have heard before, and some of you as well, particularly on the multiple choice exams, there might be more than one correct answer, but you need to select what is the best answer. So again, what exactly is the question asking you? What exactly are the differences between the answer options? Is one more correct, more better than another? And if so, that's the one that you should be selecting. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I think I've answered almost all of the questions in the chat. There was one from way earlier in the beginning, which I'll go ahead and address right now. Can you explain the Title Act versus Practice Act and their permitting privileges? Unfortunately, Emily, maybe if you've seen for interior design, I can't give that much insight because it varies so much from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So what your permissions might be in the state of Texas, for example, where you get stamp and seal, are different than what they are in Indiana, where you can just use the title registered interior designer. And that's different than what it is in Ontario, where you're required to be NCIDQ certified to call yourself an interior designer, period. So it really does vary from each state and province. We do have on our website a regulated jurisdictions page that was sort of at the bottom of that slide with the map that I'd encourage you to take a look at, that has links to each of the states and provinces that you can read more about the specifics for each of those locations. And Julianne also just provided a link, yes, for the IIDA National. They have an advocacy page with those sorts of details as well. One more question in the chat here. Are the tests easy to reschedule after already having scheduled all 3 exams? So kind of. You can reschedule an exam for the current administration only. So if you've already purchased an exam for October and it's on October 2nd, and now you have a meeting, you can reschedule it for another date in October, not for April. That's a cancellation and you would have to pay a fee. There is a fee associated with the rescheduling if it's done within a certain time period, and it's based on test center availability. So it would be based on what they have available. Kate, any other last minute tips or advice that we didn't cover that you might want to share?
I think just transparency. I think sometimes it could be scary to admit that you're taking a test, because then you'd have to admit to people if you failed. And first of all, it's perfectly fine to fail the first time and take the test again. But second of all, having a network of people who can give you information was super important to me. Communicating to my studio leader that I was taking the test was also important, because she was really able to advocate for my time and really set some boundaries with in terms of overtime and in terms of people overbooking me. And she was also able to advocate for me to get compensated for study materials, and give me that PTO I needed to take I didn't need to take any PTO to take the test. That was all covered by my firm as well. So really be transparent, really ask what resources are available to you from your firm, and just ask questions and learn to rely on friends.
I totally agree with that. Even if your company's not able to financially be supportive of you, like she said, at least they could be more understanding of maybe what you're going to be going through over the next 3 months. So they're maybe a little more cognizant and means their scheduling or after hours things. And if nothing else, maybe they could serve as a mentor to you. So, hey, I'm available. If you're studying, any questions you have, my door is open, come in and talk to me. Or maybe they know someone else at another firm that they can match you with again, that you can sort of form your own little study group with. But with that, I know we're almost at time. I did answer all the questions in the chat, but we'll see if any more come in. But I really appreciate Kate being here and the IIDA Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware chapter for putting on today's event. Hopefully you guys found it to be informative and learned some new things today. But with that, I'll turn it back over to the IIDA folks and see if there's any last minute comments.
I thought that was all very super helpful, and taking it, I think like 3 years ago now, I felt like everything, all the tips and tricks were like very in line with what I remember. So it was definitely very helpful to see like its rigor and validity is still strong, but it's definitely still changing every minute. But I appreciate, Kate, all of the feedback that you have, that it's so relevant, and Kimberly for taking the time to come out and speak to us all and giving your insights as well. And thanks everyone else for tuning in. Pasquale, Julianne, any other comments or?
Covered it. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you also, Kate. Both of you had incredible information and insight. I'm planning to take all 3 exams in October, and this was really, really helpful for me. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can open up the floor for that. Also know that you can always reach out to us here at IIDA or the people at CIDQ. All their emails are on the website. I accidentally paid for 1 exam twice, and they were super responsive and great for my idiocy. So CIDQ is a great resource. We're a great resource. A bunch of our board members are already NCIDQ certified, so we're a resource for you as well. But if that's it, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jenna and Pasquale. And hope to see everyone at another IIDA event soon.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.